Sir, are you absolutely sure this baby belongs to you?
Darius Thompson looked up from his 8-month-old daughter, Hope, who was starting to fuss in his arms at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. The gate agent, Sophia Martinez, stared at him with barely concealed suspicion, her fingers hovering over her keyboard like she was preparing to call security. "Excuse me." Darius shifted Hope to his other arm, trying to keep his voice level. He was used to this by now. 8 months of being a single black father had taught him that everywhere he went with Hope, people questioned whether she was really his. "I need to see additional documentation proving parental custody," Sophia continued, her voice sharp and official. "We've had issues with child trafficking recently." Darius glanced around the gate area. A white father with 2 toddlers had just walked through without showing anything beyond his boarding pass. A Hispanic mother with an infant hadn't been questioned at all, but here he stood being treated like a criminal for the crime of traveling with his own daughter. He pulled out his phone and showed Sophia the birth certificate he'd learned to keep readily available. Hope Thompson, father, listed as Darius Thompson. Same last name on his ID. "This could be forged," Sophia muttered, barely glancing at the documents. Behind him, in line, a woman with kind eyes and tired shoulders watched the interaction with growing concern. Rachel Morgan had buried her mother just 2 weeks ago and was flying home to Boston with her 4-year-old daughter, Lily. She recognized the look on Darius's face because she'd worn it herself countless times. The look of a parent being judged, questioned, found wanting by strangers who thought they knew better. "Ma'am," Darius said quietly, his patience wearing thin. "I have a confirmed seat on this flight. My daughter and I have been through security. We're just trying to get home." Sophia's eyes narrowed. Where's the mother? The question hit like a physical blow. Darius felt his chest tighten, the familiar wave of grief threatening to pull him under. Hope started crying, sensing his distress, and Sophia's expression grew even more disapproving. "She died," Darius said simply. 8 months ago, in childbirth. For a moment, Sophia's facade cracked, but then she recovered her bureaucratic armor, sliding back into place. "I still need to verify this with my supervisor. Is there a problem here?" Rachel Morgan stepped forward, Lily holding tight to her hand. She'd heard enough. "No problem," Sophia replied curtly, "just following protocol." Rachel looked at the other families who'd boarded without question, then back at Darius and Hope. "What kind of protocol requires harassing a grieving father?" Darius looked at this stranger who'd just spoken up for him. She had shoulder-length brown hair, tired green eyes, and the kind of quiet strength that came from carrying heavy burdens alone. Lily peeked out from behind her mother's legs, a small girl with blonde curls and curious blue eyes. "It's okay," Darius told Rachel softly. "I'm used to it." "Well, you shouldn't have to be." Sophia's supervisor arrived, a middle-aged man named Frank, who took one look at the situation and sighed heavily. "What's the issue?" "Single father, traveling with infant. No mother present." Sophia rattled off like she was reading charges. Frank glanced at Darius's documents, then at the other families around the gate. "Everything looks in order. Let them board." Sophia's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. As Darius walked past her toward the boarding gate, she called out loud enough for others to hear, "Some people just shouldn't travel with babies they can't handle." The words were meant to wound, and they did. Darius had spent every day for 8 months wondering if he was enough, if Hope deserved better than a father who was still learning how to braid hair and pack diaper bags and remember which cry meant hungry versus tired versus scared. He'd built Skylink Technologies from nothing into a company that processed 45% of airline reservations in North America. He commanded boardrooms, negotiated million-dollar deals, and employed over 3,000 people. But at moments like this, he felt like exactly what Sophia saw a man in over his head, pretending to be something he wasn't. What Sophia didn't know was that Red Wing Airlines, the carrier they were all about to board, was Skylink's biggest partner. That the software running their reservation platform had been personally coded by Darius in his garage 6 years ago. That he could, with a single phone call, ground every Red Wing flight in the country. But he wasn't here as the CEO of Skylink Technologies. He was here as Hope's father, trying to take his daughter to meet her maternal grandparents in Boston for the first time, trying to be normal, trying to prove to himself that he could do this parenting thing without the armor of corporate power. His phone buzzed with notifications. Emergency board meetings scheduled. Stock prices fluctuating. Partnership agreements requiring review. The business world that usually commanded his full attention felt distant and unimportant compared to the weight of hope in his arms and the echo of Sophia's cruel words. Rachel and Lily ended up boarding right behind them. As they walked down the jet bridge, Lily tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mama, why was that lady being mean to the airplane daddy?" Rachel glanced at Darius, who was trying to juggle Hope, his carry-on bag, and his composure. "Some people forget how to be kind, sweetheart." "That's sad," Lily said matter-of-factly. The baby looked scared. She wasn't wrong. Hope was whimpering, her little fists clenched, picking up on the stress and tension radiating from her father. At 8 months old, she couldn't understand words, but she felt everything. Darius had lost his wife Alicia exactly 8 months and 12 days ago. She'd been excited about this trip to Boston, planning to introduce Hope to her parents to show off their perfect daughter to her childhood friends. Instead, Darius was making the journey alone, carrying both his grief and his daughter, wondering if he was honoring Alicia's memory or failing it. He'd deliberately chosen a coach seat for this flight. As the CEO of a company worth over $2 billion, he could afford first-class private jets, any luxury he wanted. But he wanted to experience air travel the way his customers did. He wanted to understand what families like his went through when they flew. He was about to get an education he'd never bargained for. The boarding process had already shown him one truth: traveling as a single black father made him suspect in ways that single white fathers never experienced. The questioning, the assumptions, the barely concealed judgment. It was a lesson he'd have to carry with him both as a father and as someone with the power to change how airlines treated passengers. As they entered the aircraft, Hope started crying again. The sound echoed through the narrow cabin, and Darius felt every pair of eyes turning toward them. Some sympathetic, some annoyed, all watching to see if he could handle what was coming next. He had no idea that the woman walking behind him, the one whose daughter had called him Airplane Daddy, was about to change both their lives forever. And he had no idea that in less than 2 hours his carefully maintained anonymity would be shattered, his corporate identity revealed, and the entire airline industry would be forced to confront its own biases because of what was about to happen in Seat 14C. Rachel settled Lily into their assigned seats across the aisle and watched as Darius struggled with Hope's car seat. The flight attendant walked past without offering help, her eyes already showing the kind of irritation that suggested this was going to be a long flight. Hope's cries were getting louder, and Rachel could see Darius starting to panic. She knew that feeling. She'd been there herself in grocery stores and restaurants and playgrounds when Lily was having a meltdown, and strangers looked at her like she was failing at the most basic human task. "Some days are harder than others," Rachel said softly, leaning across the aisle. Darius looked up, surprised by the kindness in her voice. "I'm sorry. I know the noise is bothering everyone. The only thing bothering me is how that gate agent treated you." Rachel's voice carried a quiet fury. "I'm Rachel, by the way. This is Lily, Darius, and this is Hope." "Hi, Hope," Lily whispered, waving at the baby. "Don't be sad. Mama says airplane rides are fun." For a moment, Hope stopped crying and looked at Lily with wide, curious eyes. It was the first time she'd been calm since they'd entered the airport, and Darius felt a surge of gratitude toward this little girl and her mother. "Thank you," he said to Rachel, "both of you." "We stick together," Rachel replied. "Single parents have to look out for each other." She didn't know yet that the man sitting across from her had the power to revolutionize the airline industry. She just knew he was a father who needed support, and she was a mother who understood what that felt like. As the plane prepared for takeoff, None of them could have predicted that this flight would become national news spark congressional hearings and ultimately lead to the most comprehensive airline reform legislation in decades. All because sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is one person choosing to show kindness to another. The trouble started before the plane even left the gate. Flight attendant Jennifer Walsh approached Darius with a smile that was all professional courtesy and no warmth. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, her uniform crisp and unwrinkled her expression, suggesting that she'd rather be anywhere else than dealing with a crying baby. "Sir, I see you're in seat 14C, but I'm afraid there's been a mistake." Darius looked down at his boarding pass, then back at Jennifer. "This is the seat I reserved. Middle seat row 14. "Well, yes, but we've had to make some adjustments due to overbooking." Jennifer's voice carried the kind of false sweetness that barely masked irritation. Coach passengers don't usually book middle seats unless they have to. I can move you and your baby to the back of the plane where the noise won't disturb other passengers." Across the aisle, Rachel looked up from settling Lily with her coloring books. She'd heard this song before, the polite but firm suggestion that certain passengers would be more comfortable somewhere else, somewhere out of sight. "I specifically requested this seat because it's close to the bathroom for diaper changes," Darius replied evenly. "My daughter and I will stay here." Hope chose that moment to let out a particularly loud wail, and Jennifer's professional mask slipped slightly. Several passengers turned to look, and Darius felt the familiar weight of judgment settling on his shoulders. 2 rows ahead, a white businessman named Brad Williams looked back with obvious annoyance. "Seriously, a crying baby, I have a conference call when we land." His seatmate, Elena Rodriguez, a well-dressed Latina woman in her 50s, shook her head disapprovingly. "Some people have no consideration for others." "I'm doing my best to calm her down," Darius said quietly, trying a bottle that Hope immediately rejected. "Maybe try a pacifier," Jennifer suggested, in a tone that implied she thought he was incompetent at basic parenting. "I tried that. She doesn't want it." "Well, crying babies can be very disruptive to other passengers." Jennifer continued, her voice getting slightly louder. "Perhaps you should consider moving to the bathroom with her until she settles down." Rachel felt something snap inside her chest. She'd been in that position herself had people suggest she take her crying daughter somewhere else, as if Lily didn't have the same right to exist in public spaces as everyone else. The suggestion that Darius should take his baby to an airplane bathroom was so cruel and degrading that she couldn't stay silent. "Excuse me," Rachel said, standing up. "Are you seriously suggesting that a paying passenger should take his infant daughter into a bathroom because she's crying?" Jennifer turned to Rachel with surprise. "I'm just trying to ensure all passengers have a comfortable flight, by humiliating a father who's clearly doing his best." Around them, other passengers started paying attention. Some had their phones out not to help, but to record what was rapidly becoming an uncomfortable confrontation. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat," Jennifer said firmly. "I'll return to my seat when you stop harassing this passenger." Hope's crying intensified, and Darius felt his stress levels skyrocketing. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of. The public scrutiny, the judgment, the assumption that he couldn't handle being a single father. Sir Jennifer said, turning back to Darius, "I really do think it would be better for everyone if you moved to a seat in the back." "I paid for this seat," Darius replied, his voice still calm, but with an edge that Rachel recognized. It was the tone of someone who was used to being in control, but was trying very hard to stay peaceful. Brad Williams stood up and turned around. "Look, man, no offense, but some of us are trying to work here. Can't you just, I don't know, keep her quiet?" "She's 8 months old," Rachel said before Darius could respond. "Babies cry. It's what they do." "Well, maybe single fathers shouldn't travel with babies they can't handle." Elena added her voice loud enough for half the cabin to hear. The words hung in the air like a slap. Rachel saw Darius's face tighten with pain, and she felt her protective instincts kick into overdrive. She'd seen that expression on her own face in mirrors after her divorce when strangers questioned her ability to raise Lily alone. "That's enough," Rachel said sharply. "Ma'am, you need to sit down," Jennifer repeated, but her authority was starting to waver. Not until you treat this passenger with basic human decency. More passengers were watching now. Some looked uncomfortable with the confrontation. Others seemed to side with Brad and Elena, their faces showing the kind of irritation that suggested they agreed that Darius and Hope were the problem. In row 18, a young woman named Jennifer Torres was already live streaming on her TikTok account. She'd started recording when she heard Jennifer Walsh's initial suggestions about moving to the bathroom, and she was capturing every moment of the escalating conflict. "Y'all, this is happening right now on my flight," she whispered into her phone. "They're harassing this dad for having a crying baby. This is so wrong." Miguel Santos, a Hispanic businessman in his 40s, had been watching the situation develop with growing discomfort. He had 3 children of his own and knew how hard it was to travel with babies. He also recognized discrimination when he saw it. "Excuse me," Miguel said, addressing Jennifer Walsh. "I've been on a lot of flights and I've never seen anyone suggest a passenger take their baby to a bathroom. That's not normal procedure." Jennifer's face flushed. "I'm just trying to accommodate all passengers." By discriminating against one, the word discriminating seemed to electrify the cabin. Several passengers started murmuring. More phones came out. The situation was spiraling beyond Jennifer's control, and she could feel it slipping away from her. "There's no discrimination here," she said defensively. "I'm following standard protocols for disruptive passengers." "A crying baby is not a disruptive passenger," Rachel said firmly, "and suggesting someone use a bathroom as a nursery is not a protocol. It's cruelty." Hope was still crying, but now there was something different in the sound. It wasn't just infant distress anymore. It was the cry of a baby who could feel the tension and hostility in the air around her. Darius tried rocking her, tried humming, tried everything he'd learned in 8 months of single parenthood. Nothing was working, and he could feel himself starting to panic. What if Rachel was wrong? What if he really couldn't handle this? What if everyone else was right, and he was just a man pretending to be something he wasn't? His phone, tucked discreetly in his jacket pocket, was buzzing with notifications. Emergency board meeting. Stock prices fluctuating. Crisis management team activated. His assistant, Carmen Rodriguez, was probably having a heart attack trying to reach him. But none of that mattered right now. Right now, he was just a father with a crying baby in a cabin full of strangers judging his every move. Sir Jennifer said, her patience clearly exhausted. "I'm going to have to ask you to either move to the back of the plane or consider deplaning until your baby is calmer." The suggestion was so outrageous that even some of the passengers who'd been annoyed by Hope's crying looked shocked. "You can't kick someone off a plane for having a crying baby," Miguel said incredulously. "I can if they're disrupting other passengers," Jennifer replied. "He's not disrupting anyone," Rachel said, her voice rising. "His baby is crying. That's normal. What's not normal is treating a passenger like a criminal for being a parent." The confrontation had now drawn the attention of the entire coach section. Passengers were choosing sides, some recording on phones, others just watching the drama unfold. And at the center of it all sat Darius Thompson, a man who could buy and sell the airline he was sitting on, being treated like he had no right to exist in public with his daughter. He was about to make a choice that would change everything. But first, the woman across the aisle was going to do something unthinkable. Rachel Morgan had reached her breaking point. She stood up from her seat, stepped across the narrow aisle, and without asking permission, gently took Hope from Darius's arms. The cabin fell silent. It wasn't just that a stranger had taken someone else's baby. It was the way she did it. With confidence, with authority, with the kind of natural movement that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. Hope's crying stopped almost immediately. Not gradually, not with the fits and starts that sometimes happen when babies are soothing themselves. She stopped all at once, as if someone had flipped a switch. "How did you?" Rachel started. "She doesn't need fixing," Rachel said, softly cradling Hope against her shoulder. "She needs defending." Jennifer Walsh stood frozen, unsure how to handle this development. She'd been preparing to call the captain, maybe even ground security, to deal with what she saw as an escalating disruption. But now the baby was calm. The situation had changed, and she was the one who looked unreasonable. "Ma'am, You can't just take someone else's child, Jennifer said weakly. I'm not taking her, Rachel replied, her voice steady and sure. I'm helping her father, the way any decent person would. She turned slightly so that more passengers could see Hope's peaceful face. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Minutes ago, this baby had been inconsolable. Now, she was content, her little fingers wrapped around Rachel's hair, her breathing slow and even. The problem was never the baby, Rachel continued, addressing not just Jennifer, but the entire cabin. The problem was how you were treating her father. Brad Williams shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Elena Rodriguez suddenly found her magazine very interesting. The passengers who had been so vocal about their annoyance moments before were now conspicuously quiet. Lily Morgan peeked over the seat back, her 4-year-old wisdom cutting through the adult confusion. Mama, why were they being mean to the airplane daddy out of the mouths of babes? The simple question hung in the air, highlighting the absurdity of what had just happened. A child could see what the adults had missed, a father loving his daughter, a family trying to travel in peace. Sometimes people forget how to be kind, sweetheart, Rachel said, still holding Hope, who was now looking around the cabin with curious, alert eyes. That's very sad, Lily said solemnly. Then to Darius, don't worry, airplane daddy, Mama fixes everything. Despite everything, Darius smiled. Your mama is pretty amazing. I know, Lily said matter-of-factly, settling back into her seat with her coloring books. Jennifer Torres, still live-streaming from row 18, was capturing every moment. Her TikTok viewers were exploding with comments, and she could see the view count climbing rapidly. Y'all, this woman just did the most beautiful thing, she whispered into her phone. She stood up, took this man's baby, and the baby stopped crying immediately. Like, this is what humanity looks like. Miguel Santos leaned across the aisle towards Darius. Your daughter's in good hands. I can see that, Darius replied, watching Rachel sway gently with Hope. There was something about the way she held his daughter that was both completely natural and deeply moving. It wasn't just technical competence. It was the kind of intuitive care that comes from understanding what it means to be responsible for a small, vulnerable life. Are you a nurse? Darius asked. Pediatric ICU, Rachel confirmed. But this isn't about medical training. This is about recognizing when someone needs support instead of judgment. She looked directly at Jennifer Walsh. This man has been nothing but polite and respectful. He's trying his best in a difficult situation. Instead of helping him, you've humiliated him. Instead of showing compassion, you've shown cruelty. Jennifer's face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. She wasn't used to being called out so directly, especially not in front of a cabin full of passengers who were now clearly on Rachel's side. I was following protocol, Jennifer said defensively. Show me the protocol that says crying babies belong in bathrooms, Miguel challenged. Show me the protocol that treats single fathers differently than single mothers, added a voice from the back of the cabin. Jennifer couldn't, because no such protocol existed. What she'd been following wasn't company policy. It was bias, pure and simple. The kind of unconscious prejudice that sees a black man with a crying baby and assumes incompetence instead of recognizing a parent having a normal parenting moment. Captain Robert Anderson's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay in our departure. We'll have you in the air shortly. The delay wasn't weather-related. Jennifer had pressed the call button for backup, and the captain was now being briefed on a passenger situation that was rapidly becoming a public relations nightmare. Rachel continued to hold Hope, who was now not just calm but actively engaged with her surroundings. She was looking at the other passengers, babbling softly, reaching for Rachel's face with the tiny, curious fingers. She's beautiful, Rachel said to Darius. What's her name, Hope? That's perfect. Rachel's voice was soft with understanding. Hope after heartbreak. Light after darkness. Darius felt something break open in his chest. This stranger had just put into words something he'd been unable to articulate for 8 months. Hope wasn't just his daughter's name. It was what she represented, what she'd given him when everything else was taken away. My wife chose the name, he said quietly, before she died. Rachel's expression softened with recognition and sympathy. She chose well. Around them, the cabin had settled into an uncomfortable quiet. The confrontation was over, but its implications were still sinking in. Passengers were looking at their phones at each other at the floor. The easy assumptions they'd made minutes earlier were crumbling under the weight of what they'd witnessed. A crying baby hadn't been the problem. A father struggling hadn't been the problem. The problem had been their response to normal human situations with suspicion and judgment instead of empathy and support. Jennifer Torres's live stream had now reached over 50,000 viewers, with comments pouring in from around the world. Parents sharing their own stories of discrimination. People calling for accountability. Others just expressing amazement at Rachel's simple act of kindness. But the real storm was just beginning. Because while Rachel had diffused the immediate situation through compassion and courage, the man whose baby she was holding had the power to ensure that what happened on this flight would have consequences far beyond a single viral video. Darius Thompson was about to reveal who he really was, and when he did, the entire airline industry would be forced to confront how it treated passengers who didn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable. The unthinkable wasn't just what Rachel had done, it was what was about to happen next. Jennifer Torres's fingers were flying across her phone screen as her live stream exploded with viewers. What had started as a casual documentation of her flight was turning into something much bigger. "Okay, chat is going absolutely crazy right now," she whispered into her phone, trying to keep her voice low while capturing the ongoing drama. "We're at 60,000 viewers and climbing. People are asking me to tag airlines, tag news stations. This is insane." She adjusted her phone angle to better capture Rachel still holding Hope, who remained perfectly content in the arms of the woman who'd defended her father. The hashtag Dads Deserve Better had started organically in her comment section and was now spreading across social media platforms. Other passengers on the flight were posting their own videos and photos, creating a real-time documentation of the incident from multiple angles. Miguel Santos had taken out his phone and was recording a video of his own. As a father of 3 and a business owner, he understood the power of social media to create accountability. "This is Miguel Santos, and I'm witnessing something that every parent needs to see," he said into his camera. "A single father is being harassed for having a crying baby, and one brave woman just stood up and showed us all what humanity looks like." He panned his camera to show Rachel gently rocking Hope, then back to his own face. "I've flown with my kids dozens of times. They've cried, they've been difficult, they've had meltdowns. Not once has anyone suggested I take them to a bathroom or leave the plane. Not once. And I think we all know why this father is being treated differently." The implications of his words rippled through the cabin and through the live streams being broadcast to thousands of viewers. This wasn't just about customer service. This was about who gets treated with dignity and who gets treated with suspicion. Captain Robert Anderson was making his way back from the cockpit, his face grave. He'd been flying commercial aircraft for 23 years and had never had a passenger incident go viral in real time. His supervisor was already calling, asking for a report, demanding to know how a routine flight had become a trending topic on multiple social media platforms. Jennifer Walsh was beginning to understand the magnitude of her mistake. Her phone was buzzing with notifications from Red Wing Airlines' emergency response team. The company's social media mentions were spiking, and none of it was positive. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Anderson announced as he entered the coach cabin, "I apologize for the delay. I understand we've had some concerns about passenger comfort." His eyes took in the scene: Rachel holding Hope, who was calm and alert. Darius sitting quietly, looking exhausted and stressed. Jennifer Walsh standing near the galley, her professional composure cracking, and dozens of passengers with phones out recording every moment. Captain Rachel said, standing with Hope still in her arms, "I think you need to understand what's been happening here. I'm listening. Your flight attendant has been harassing this passenger since boarding. She suggested he take his crying baby to the bathroom. She tried to force him to change seats. She threatened to have him removed from the plane. All because his daughter was crying." Captain Anderson looked at Jennifer Walsh, whose face had gone pale. "Is this accurate? I was trying to accommodate all passengers," Jennifer said defensively. The baby was being disruptive. babies cry. Miguel Santos interjected from his seat. It's what they do. What's disruptive is treating a paying customer like a criminal. Sir Captain Anderson said to Darius, I sincerely apologize if you've been treated inappropriately. That's not the Red Wing Airlines experience we want to provide. Darius looked up at the captain, then at Rachel, who was still holding his daughter. He could see the phone's recording, could see the concern and sympathy on some faces, the lingering annoyance on others. He was at a crossroads. He could accept the apology, try to smooth things over, let the incident pass. That would be the safe choice. The choice that wouldn't draw unwanted attention to his identity or his company. Or he could use this moment to shine a light on something that happened to parents like him every day. Parents who didn't have the resources or platform to fight back when they were treated as less than human for the crime of existing in public with their children. His phone buzzed again. Carmen Rodriguez, his assistant, was in full panic mode. The company's crisis management team had been activated. Board members were calling emergency meetings. Something was happening to Red Wing Airlines' stock price and they needed him to respond. But for the first time in 8 months, Darius wasn't thinking like a CEO. He was thinking like a father. Captain, he said quietly, I appreciate the apology. But I need you to understand that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was discrimination. The word landed heavily in the cabin. Phones continued recording. Live streams continued broadcasting. The story was spreading beyond the confines of the aircraft, reaching parents and advocates and anyone who'd ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. Jennifer Torres's viewer count had passed 100,000. The comments section was a flood of outraged support and calls for action. News outlets were starting to pick up the story. Celebrity parents were beginning to retweet and share. That's a serious accusation, Captain Anderson said carefully. It's a serious situation, Rachel replied, still holding hope. I watched your employee treat this man differently than she would have treated a white father or a mother in the same situation. I watched passengers make assumptions and comments that they never would have made about someone who looked different. That's not true, Elena Rodriguez protested from her seat. I would have complained about any crying baby. Would you have told any father that he shouldn't travel with a baby he can't handle? Miguel asked pointedly. Elena's silence was answer enough. Captain Anderson could see the situation spiraling beyond his control. He was a pilot, not a crisis management specialist. He knew how to handle mechanical problems and weather emergencies, but social media firestorms were outside his expertise. Perhaps we should discuss this more privately, he suggested. No, Darius said firmly. This conversation needs to happen here in front of everyone because this treatment happens in public. It happened in front of all these passengers and some of them supported it. That's the problem that needs addressing. Jennifer Torres was frantically typing responses to her chat. Major news outlets were now messaging her directly asking for permission to use her footage. The story was growing beyond anything she'd expected when she'd started recording. Update for everyone watching, she whispered into her phone. The captain is here now, and this dad is not backing down. He's calling it what it is. Discrimination. And honestly, good for him. Someone needs to say it. In her seat, Lily Morgan was coloring a picture of an airplane with 4 stick figures inside it. When she finished, she held it up for her mother to see. That's us, Mama. You and me, and Airplane Daddy, and Baby Hope. Rachel looked at the drawing at this innocent child who saw people as simply people who didn't understand why adults made things so complicated. It's beautiful, sweetheart. We're all a family on the airplane, Lily said matter-of-factly. The simple truth of it hit everyone who heard it. They were all passengers on the same flight, all trying to get somewhere, all deserving of basic human dignity. But somewhere along the way, they'd forgotten that. Captain Anderson was looking increasingly uncomfortable as more passengers pulled out phones and began recording their own videos. He knew that every word spoken here would be analyzed, shared, and potentially used in lawsuits or congressional hearings. Sir, he said to Darius, what would you like us to do to resolve this situation? It was the question that would change everything because Darius Thompson was about to stop being a passenger and start being a CEO. And when he did, Red Wing Airlines would discover that they'd discriminated against someone who had the power to ground their entire fleet with a single phone call. But first, Rachel was going to hand Hope back to her father and make a statement that would be quoted in news articles and played in diversity training seminars for years to come. What I'd like, she said, is for everyone on this plane to remember what they witnessed here today. A father was targeted for his race. A baby was treated like a problem instead of a person. And when one passenger stood up for what was right, it changed everything. She gently placed Hope back in Darius's arms, and the baby immediately reached for her father's face with tiny, trusting fingers. The solution isn't complicated, Rachel continued. Treat people with kindness. See parents as people doing their best, and remember that the content of someone's character has nothing to do with the color of their skin or the volume of their crying baby. The cabin was silent except for the sound of Hope's contented babbling as she settled back into her father's arms. What happened next would make headlines around the world. I'm calling security. Jennifer Walsh's declaration cut through the cabin's tense silence like a blade. Her professional facade was completely gone now, replaced by the angry desperation of someone who knew she was losing control of the situation. "You're calling security on a father with a crying baby?" Rachel asked incredulously. "I'm calling security on passengers who are disrupting this flight and refusing to follow crew instructions." Captain Anderson held up a hand. "Let's not escalate this further. I think we can resolve this without." No, Captain, Jennifer interrupted, her voice rising. "This passenger has been uncooperative from the start. He's caused a disturbance, he's encouraged other passengers to interfere with crew duties, and he's refused to take reasonable steps to minimize disruption to other travelers." The lies were so blatant that several passengers gasped audibly. Miguel Santos stood up from his seat. "That is completely false," he said firmly. "I've been watching this entire interaction. This man has been nothing but respectful and compliant. You're the one who's been disruptive." "Sir, sit down," Jennifer snapped. "I will not. You're about to call security on an innocent passenger, and I'm not going to sit quietly while it happens." Jennifer Torres was frantically updating her livestream viewers. "Guys, this is getting insane. The flight attendant is literally calling security on this dad. We're at 150,000 viewers now, and the comments are going crazy. People are tagging news stations, airlines, government officials. This is becoming huge." Darius sat quietly, Hope in his arms, watching the chaos unfold around him. His phone was buzzing constantly now. Emergency board meeting in progress. Stock prices fluctuating wildly. Crisis management team activated. Carmen Rodriguez had sent 17 urgent messages in the last 10 minutes. But something had shifted in Darius's thinking during this confrontation. For 8 months, he'd been trying to navigate parenthood as just another single father hiding his corporate identity, pretending he was ordinary. He'd thought that was the right approach. That Hope deserved a father who was just a dad, not a CEO. But watching Jennifer Walsh prepare to call security on him, seeing the way some passengers still looked at him with suspicion and judgment, he realized that his silence wasn't protecting Hope. It was enabling the prejudice that would follow her throughout her life. Brad Williams was shaking his head in disgust. "This whole thing is ridiculous. Just get him off the plane so we can take off." "Get who?" "Off the plane." Rachel's voice was ice cold. A paying passenger who's done nothing wrong. A passenger who brought a disruptive baby on a flight and then encouraged a circus when people complained about it. The only circus here is how you're all treating a man for the crime of being a father. Elena Rodriguez was looking increasingly uncomfortable as more passengers began openly supporting Darius and Rachel. She'd been so sure that her annoyance was justified, but now she was starting to realize how her words sounded when played back in a public forum. Lily Morgan tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mama? Why do the mean people want the airplane daddy to leave because they've forgotten how to be kind sweetheart?" "That's very sad," Lily said seriously. Then, raising her voice so others could hear, "Airplane daddy seems nice. and baby Hope is very pretty, out of the mouths of babes. Again, the simple, honest observation of a 4-year-old cutting through the adult complexity and revealing the truth underneath. Captain Anderson was looking more and more uncomfortable as the situation deteriorated. He'd been hoping to smooth things over with apologies and goodwill, but Jennifer Walsh seemed determined to escalate the conflict beyond any reasonable resolution. "Jennifer," he said quietly, "perhaps we should step back and know Captain. We have protocols for disruptive passengers and I'm following them. But he's not being disruptive. His baby was crying. Babies cry. That's not a crime. The exchange was being recorded by multiple passengers and broadcast live to thousands of viewers." Captain Anderson was inadvertently making his company's position clear. There was no policy that justified what Jennifer was doing. Darius made a decision. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact labeled simply Carmen Emergency. He typed a quick message: "Activate Crisis Protocol. Red Wing Airlines. Discrimination incident. Going public in 5 minutes." The response was immediate. "Sir, are you sure this will be irreversible?" Darius looked at Hope, who was looking back at him with perfect trust and innocence. He thought about the world she would grow up in, the assumptions people would make about her because of her skin color, the prejudices she would face. Then he typed back, "I'm sure." His phone immediately exploded with activity: emergency notifications, conference call requests, stock alerts. The crisis management team was assembling, the legal department was being briefed, and the public relations team was preparing for what was about to become the biggest airline discrimination story in years. But none of that was visible to the passengers around him. They still saw just a struggling single father with a baby, a man being harassed by airline staff for no good reason. Jennifer Walsh had made her way to the front of the cabin and was speaking quietly into the aircraft's phone. Security was being called. The situation was about to escalate dramatically. "This is wrong," Miguel Santos said loudly. "Everyone here knows this is wrong." Several other passengers murmured agreement. The tide of public opinion had turned completely against Jennifer and the airline. Jennifer Torres was providing play-by-play commentary to her still-growing audience. "Okay, so security is being called because a black father had a crying baby and one woman stood up for him? If this doesn't show you everything wrong with how we treat people in this country, I don't know what will." The hashtag Dads Deserve Better was now trending nationwide. News outlets were picking up the story. Celebrity parents were beginning to share and comment. The story was growing beyond the confines of the aircraft and becoming a cultural flashpoint. Rachel was still standing in the aisle, having taken an unofficial leadership role in defending Darius. She'd positioned herself between him and Jennifer Walsh, a physical barrier protecting a fellow parent from institutional harassment. "I want everyone here to remember what you're witnessing," she said, addressing the entire cabin. "Remember that when a father needed support, most people stayed silent. Remember that when discrimination happened right in front of you, some of you supported it. And remember that sometimes it takes one person standing up to reveal what's really going on." Darius felt a surge of gratitude and admiration for this stranger who'd become his defender. She was risking her own comfort and safety to protect him and Hope, and she was doing it with a courage and moral clarity that was breathtaking. But she didn't know yet that the man she was defending had the power to ensure that her courage wouldn't be wasted. That this moment of injustice could become a catalyst for real change. Security was on their way. The story was going viral, and Darius Thompson was about to reveal that the passenger they'd been discriminating against was the CEO of the company that controlled nearly half of their business. The reckoning was coming. The security officers arrived just as Darius finished composing his message to the Skylink Technologies crisis management team. 2 uniformed men walked down the aisle with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested they'd been briefed on a difficult passenger situation. "Where's the problem?" asked the lead officer, a tall man named Johnson, whose hand instinctively moved toward his radio. Jennifer Walsh pointed directly at Darius. "This passenger has been uncooperative and disruptive. He's refused to follow crew instructions and has encouraged other passengers to interfere with flight operations." Johnson looked at Darius, who was sitting quietly with Hope in his arms, then at Rachel, who was standing protectively nearby. What exactly has he done? His baby was crying and disturbing other passengers. When we asked him to take reasonable steps to minimize the disturbance, he refused and created a confrontation. He asked him to take the baby to a bathroom, Rachel interjected. That's not reasonable. That's degrading. Ma'am, I need you to step back, Johnson said. No, you need to hear what actually happened here. Miguel Santos stood up again. Officer, I've been watching this entire situation. This man has done nothing wrong. Nothing, his baby cried, which babies do, and your employee here decided to harass him for it. Johnson looked around the cabin, taking in the dozens of phones still recording the tense faces, the obvious division among passengers. This wasn't a typical disturbance call. Jennifer Torres was whispering urgently into her phone. Security is here now. We're at 200,000 viewers. This is the biggest thing that's ever happened on my stream. Darius made his decision. Officer, he said quietly, standing up with Hope still in his arms before this goes any further, I think there's something you should know. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, scrolling to a contact that simply read Red Wing Corporate Emergency Line. He hit dial and put the phone on speaker. This is the Red Wing Airlines Executive Emergency Hotline. How can we assist you? This is Darius Thompson. I need to speak with CEO Richard Caldwell immediately. It's about a discrimination incident involving one of your flights. Jennifer Walsh laughed. Right, and I'm the Queen of England. Officer, this is obviously a Mr. Thompson. The voice on the phone had changed, becoming suddenly urgent. Sir, we've been trying to reach you. We're aware of the social media situation developing on Flight 447. Are you on that aircraft? The cabin went dead silent. Every recording phone, every live stream, every conversation stopped. Even Hope seemed to sense the shift in energy, looking around with wide, curious eyes. I am on this flight, yes, and I want you to confirm for the security officers present that I am who I say I am. Sir, this is Miranda Walsh, Vice President of Crisis Management for Red Wing Airlines. I can confirm that you are Darius Thompson, CEO of Skylink Technologies, our primary reservation platform partner. Sir, our legal team is standing by, and Darius ended the call. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Jennifer Walsh's face had gone completely white. Johnson, the security officer, looked confused and suddenly nervous. Captain Anderson, who had just returned to the cabin, stopped dead in his tracks. I'm sorry, Captain Anderson said slowly. Did she just say you're the CEO of Skylink Technologies? I am? Miguel Santos was grinning broadly. Jennifer Torres was frantically trying to keep up with the explosion of comments on her live stream. Brad Williams looked like he was going to be sick. For those just joining us, Jennifer Torres whispered into her phone, her voice shaking with excitement. The dad they've been harassing, he's the CEO of the company that runs almost half of all airline reservations in America. Y'all, this just got real. Darius looked directly at Jennifer Walsh. Miss Walsh, you've spent the last hour questioning my right to fly with my daughter, suggesting I take her to a bathroom, threatening to have me removed from the aircraft, and calling security on me for the crime of being a black father with a crying baby. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. This wasn't Darius, the struggling single parent, anymore. This was Darius Thompson, CEO, a man used to commanding rooms and making decisions that affected thousands of people. Mr. Thompson, I was just following protocol, Jennifer stammered. What protocol? His question was sharp and precise. Show me the Red Wing Airlines manual that says crying babies belong in bathrooms. Show me the policy that treats single fathers differently than single mothers. Show me the procedure that justifies calling security on a paying passenger whose only crime was existing while black. Jennifer couldn't answer because no such protocols existed. Captain Anderson stepped forward. Mr. Thompson, on behalf of Red Wing Airlines, I want to apologize for Captain. With all due respect, your apology is noted, but insufficient. What I've experienced today isn't an aberration, it's a pattern, and it's about to change. Darius's phone was buzzing with notifications. Emergency board meeting initiated, stock prices in freefall, news outlets demanding statements. The story was exploding across every social media platform and major news network. But more importantly, other parents were starting to share their own stories. Black fathers posting about being questioned at airports, single mothers of color describing harassment on flights. The incident was becoming a flashpoint for conversations about discrimination that had been simmering for years. Officer Johnson Darius continued, "I assume you'll be filing a report about this incident?" Johnson nodded, still looking stunned by the revelation. "I want it noted that no passenger safety protocols were violated, no federal regulations were broken, and no airline policies were breached. What happened here was discrimination, pure and simple." Rachel was staring at Darius with a mixture of admiration and amazement. She'd defended him because it was the right thing to do, not knowing she was protecting one of the most powerful men in the airline industry. "You're really a CEO?" she asked softly. Darius nodded. "I built Skylink Technologies from nothing. We process billions of dollars in airline reservations every year. Red Wing is our largest partner. And you were flying coach. I wanted to experience air travel the way my customers do. I wanted to understand what families go through when they fly with children." His smile was bitter. "I got quite an education." Elena Rodriguez was frantically trying to delete the videos she'd taken earlier. Brad Williams was slumping in his seat, realizing that his recorded complaints about single fathers who can't handle babies were about to be seen by millions of people. But the most important reaction was happening online. Parents across the country were sharing the story, using hashtags like "Dads Deserve Better" and "Flying While Black." The incident was becoming a catalyst for broader conversations about dignity, respect, and equal treatment. Lily Morgan, oblivious to the corporate implications of what was happening, tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mama, does this mean Airplane Daddy is important?" "It means Airplane Daddy was always important, sweetheart. He just happens to be powerful too." Jennifer Walsh realized her career was over. She'd discriminated against someone who could destroy the entire airline with a phone call, and she'd done it in front of hundreds of thousands of live stream viewers. "Mr. Thompson," she said desperately, "please, I was just trying to—" "You were trying to put a black father in his place," Darius said quietly. "You were trying to make me feel small and unwelcome and grateful for whatever scraps of dignity you chose to give me." He looked around the cabin, making eye contact with passengers who'd been recording the entire incident. "But here's what you didn't understand. My daughter doesn't make me less than anyone else in this cabin. My skin color doesn't make me less deserving of respect, and my grief doesn't make me weak." Hope chose that moment to reach up and touch her father's face with tiny, perfect fingers. The gesture was captured by dozens of cameras and would become one of the most shared images of the entire incident. "Miss Walsh, you're terminated effective immediately." The words were spoken softly, but they carried the weight of absolute authority. This wasn't a threat or a negotiation. It was a decision made by someone with the power to enforce it. "You can't fire me," Jennifer protested weakly. "Actually, I can. Skylink Technologies holds a controlling stake in Red Wing's reservation and logistics platform. Our partnership agreement includes provisions for passenger treatment standards. You've violated those standards in a way that's been documented and broadcast to hundreds of thousands of viewers." Darius's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Richard Caldwell, Red Wing CEO. He answered and put it on speaker again. "Darius, thank God. We need to talk immediately about damage control, Richard. No damage control. I want Jennifer Walsh terminated within the hour. I want every passenger on this flight compensated. And I want a comprehensive review of your company's treatment of minority passengers. Consider it done. Darius, the board is in emergency session. Your stock price is the least of your concerns right now. Richard, fix the culture that allowed this to happen, or I'll find partners who will." He ended the call and looked around the cabin one more time. "Justice," he said simply, "doesn't depend on who you know or how much money you have. But power does. And I'm going to use mine to make sure no other parent goes through what I experienced today. The revelation changed everything. But the real work was just beginning. The transformation in the cabin was immediate and electric. Jennifer Walsh stood frozen, the reality of her situation sinking in. She'd gone from having authority over passengers to being unemployed in a matter of minutes, and it had all been broadcast live to hundreds of thousands of viewers. "This isn't legal," she said, desperately grasping for any lifeline. "You can't just fire someone without cause without following procedures." "The cause is discrimination against a passenger documented on multiple video recordings and witnessed by dozens of people," Darius replied calmly. "The procedures are outlined in Skylink's partnership agreements with Red Wing, which you've just violated in the most public way possible." Captain Anderson was frantically trying to understand the corporate implications of what was happening. "Mr. Thompson, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "Captain, this happened publicly. The resolution happens publicly too." Darius's voice carried the authority of someone used to making decisions that affected thousands of people. Every passenger on this flight just witnessed discrimination in action. They deserved to see accountability in action too. Miguel Santos was openly grinning his phone out, recording everything. "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Justice served in real time." Jennifer Torres was barely able to keep up with the explosion of her live stream. "We're at 500,000 viewers now," she whispered urgently into her phone. "This man just fired the flight attendant who was harassing him. Live, on my stream, I can't even... This is incredible, but the consequences were rippling far beyond the aircraft." In corporate boardrooms across the country, executives were watching the story unfold with growing alarm. If a major airline could be held accountable this quickly and publicly for discrimination, what did that mean for their own companies? At Skylink Technologies headquarters, Carmen Rodriguez was fielding calls from news outlets, legal teams, and board members. The crisis management team was working overtime to coordinate responses, but for once, they weren't trying to contain damage. They were managing a victory. Carmen Darius said into his phone, "I want you to issue a statement within the hour. Skylink Technologies has zero tolerance for discrimination by our partners. Any airline that fails to treat passengers with dignity and respect will lose access to our platform. Sir, that's a significant percentage of the industry. Then they'd better learn to do better." Brad Williams was sinking lower in his seat, suddenly aware that his recorded complaints about single fathers who can't handle babies were about to be seen by his colleagues, his clients, and his family. The casual racism he'd displayed would follow him for years. Elena Rodriguez was desperately trying to figure out how to undo her earlier behavior, but there was no taking back words that had been recorded and broadcast to hundreds of thousands of people. "Mr. Thompson," she called out, her voice shaky. "I want to apologize for my earlier comments. I was frustrated about the delay, and I said things I didn't mean." "You said exactly what you meant," Darius replied without turning around. "You meant that you don't think black fathers belong in public spaces with their children. You meant that crying babies are problems to be solved rather than small humans having normal experiences. You meant every word." The truth of it hit Elena like a physical blow. She had meant those things in the moment. The recording would show her true thoughts unfiltered by social niceties or professional facades. Rachel was watching this transformation with fascination and admiration. She'd stood up for a fellow parent because it was the right thing to do. She hadn't known she was defending someone who could change the entire industry's approach to passenger treatment. "Hope is lucky to have you as a father," she said quietly to Darius. "I'm lucky to have met someone like you," he replied. "What you did today, it took real courage. It took basic human decency, which is apparently in short supply on airplanes." Security Officer Johnson was looking increasingly uncomfortable as he realized he'd been called to remove a passenger who had more power than anyone else on the aircraft. "Mr. Thompson, I want to apologize for responding to what appears to have been a discriminatory complaint. Officer, you did your job. The problem wasn't with security responding. The problem was with what they were asked to respond to." Johnson nodded gratefully, but he knew this incident would follow him too. The video of him arriving to potentially arrest a black father for having a crying baby would be part of his record forever. Captain Anderson's radio crackled to life. It was Red Wing corporate headquarters with new instructions. "Captain Anderson, this is headquarters. You are directed to provide Mr. Thompson and his daughter with first-class accommodations for the remainder of their journey. Full VIP treatment. Do not take off until this is resolved to his satisfaction. Understood. But Darius shook his head. Captain, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm staying in my assigned seat. The problem isn't where I'm sitting. The problem is how I've been treated. Moving me to first class doesn't solve that. Sir, we want to make this right. You make it right by ensuring it doesn't happen again. To anyone. Not just to people who happen to have corporate power. The distinction was important and everyone knew it. This wasn't about getting better treatment for Darius Thompson, CEO. This was about ensuring equal treatment for every Darius Thompson who couldn't fight back. Lily Morgan had been coloring quietly during the confrontation, but now she held up a new picture. This one showed stick figures holding hands around what might have been an airplane. Mama, I drew everyone being friends, she announced. That's beautiful, sweetheart. Can we be friends with Airplane Daddy and Baby Hope forever? Rachel looked at Darius, who was smiling at Lily's innocent question. I think that would be very nice. The interaction was being captured by multiple cameras and would become part of the story's emotional resonance. A child's simple wish for friendship cutting through all the corporate complexity and legal implications. Jennifer Walsh was gathering her belongings with shaking hands, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. She'd be escorted off the aircraft to the next airport, her career in aviation over her actions immortalized in a viral video that would follow her for the rest of her life. Miss Walsh, Darius said as she passed his seat, his voice not unkind but firm. I want you to understand something. What happened today wasn't personal, it was pattern. You didn't invent airline discrimination, but you participated in it and you got caught. She stopped, tears starting to form in her eyes. The father who gets harassed next week might not be a CEO. He might be a teacher or a mechanic or unemployed. He might not have the power to fight back. Remember that when you're looking for your next job. It was as close to mercy as she was going to get, and she knew it. As Jennifer Walsh left the aircraft under security escort, the remaining passengers began to process what they'd witnessed. A moment of discrimination had been exposed, challenged, and punished in real time. Authority had been held accountable. Justice, however imperfect, had been served. But more importantly, the story was spreading beyond the aircraft, beyond social media, beyond the immediate participants. It was becoming a catalyst for conversations about dignity, respect, and equal treatment that would continue long after Flight 447 finally took off. The immediate consequences were just the beginning. Within 30 minutes of Darius revealing his identity, Dads Deserve Better was trending #1 worldwide on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Jennifer Torres's live stream had reached over 1 million viewers, making it one of the most watched real-time events in social media history. Guys, I literally can't keep up with the comments, Jennifer whispered into her phone, her voice shaking with excitement and disbelief. We've got politicians tweeting about this, celebrities sharing at news stations calling me. This has exploded beyond anything I could have imagined. The comment section was a flood of support, outrage, and similar stories. This happened to my husband when he flew with our twins. Thank you for filming this. Every single black father I know has a story like this, every single one. That flight attendant deserved to be fired. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. The way that woman stood up for him gives me hope for humanity. CEO or not, no parent should be treated like this. Major news outlets were scrambling to cover the developing story. CNN had interrupted regular programming for a special report. MSNBC was leading with it. Fox News was doing damage control, trying to frame it as an isolated incident, rather than a pattern of discrimination. At the New York Times, newsroom reporter Sarah Chen was frantically reaching out to aviation industry experts, civil rights lawyers, and parent advocacy groups for comment. This wasn't just a feel-good story about one incident being resolved. This was a corporate accountability story with massive implications for the airline industry. This is the first time I've seen real-time consequences for airline discrimination, said Dr. Maya Patel, a Georgetown law professor specializing in transportation civil rights. Usually, these incidents get buried in complaints departments and nothing changes. But when the victim has the power to force immediate accountability, that's game-changing. Celebrity parents were amplifying the story across platforms. Actor and father of 3, Marcus Johnson, tweeted, "Been there, done that. Had security called on me for looking suspicious while traveling with my kids. Thank God someone finally had the power to fight back." Dads Deserve Better television host and mother Ellen Rodriguez shared Jennifer Torres's live stream with the comment, "This is what courage looks like." One woman standing up when everyone else stayed silent. Be like Rachel. But the most powerful responses were coming from ordinary parents sharing their own experiences. "My husband was questioned at LAX for traveling alone with our daughter. They demanded DNA tests. She's mixed race and doesn't look like him according to security. I'm a single mom and I've never once been asked to take my crying baby to a bathroom. The double standard is real. Flying while black with kids is a nightmare. Thank you to this CEO for using his platform to fight back." At Red Wing Airlines headquarters, the crisis management team was in full panic mode. The company's stock had dropped 18% in 30 minutes. Booking cancellations were pouring in. Corporate customers were threatening to pull their accounts. CEO Richard Caldwell was pacing his office while lawyers, PR specialists, and board members tried to craft a response that would contain the damage. "How did we not know that Darius Thompson flies coach?" sometimes Caldwell demanded. "How did we not have protocols in place for high-value customers?" "Sir, the issue isn't that we didn't recognize him," said Chief Legal Counsel Patricia Santos. "The issue is that our employee discriminated against a paying passenger. If we'd treated him properly from the start, his identity wouldn't have mattered. Well, it matters now." Skylink processes 47% of our reservations. If Thompson pulls that partnership, we're bankrupt within 6 months. But Thompson wasn't threatening to pull business out of spite. He was demanding changes that would affect how all passengers were treated. And that was proving harder to promise than simple financial compensation. Back on Flight 447, the atmosphere had completely transformed. Passengers who had been annoyed by Hope's crying were now apologizing to Darius. Others were sharing their own stories of discrimination and bias. The viral moment had created a temporary community united by shared recognition of injustice. Miguel Santos had appointed himself the unofficial coordinator of passenger support. "We need to make sure everyone here knows they witnessed history today. This story needs to be told completely and honestly." He was moving through the cabin, encouraging passengers to share their videos and recordings with journalists to speak to reporters when they landed, to ensure that the full story was preserved. "Mr. Thompson," he said, approaching Darius's seat, "my oldest daughter is starting college next year. She wants to study business. Would you be willing to speak to her class about leadership and standing up for what's right?" Darius looked surprised by the request. "I don't know if I'm the right person for that." "You're exactly the right person. You showed these kids that power comes with responsibility, and that responsibility includes protecting people who can't protect themselves." Rachel was watching this transformation with wonder. She'd stood up for a fellow parent because it was the right thing to do, but watching Darius handle the aftermath with grace and purpose was extraordinary. "How are you feeling about all this?" she asked quietly. "Honestly overwhelmed. I didn't want this kind of attention. I just wanted to fly to Boston with my daughter. But you're using it well. What you said about the father who gets harassed next week who isn't a CEO, that's going to stick with people." Hope was sleeping peacefully in Darius's arms, completely unaware that she was at the center of a national conversation about dignity and civil rights. Her quiet breathing was a stark contrast to the social media storm raging around the world. Lily Morgan was still coloring now, working on a picture of what appeared to be people holding protest signs. When Rachel asked what she was drawing, Lily explained seriously, "It's people being nice to daddies with babies." The innocent activism of a 4-year-old was being captured by nearby passengers and shared online, adding another layer of emotional resonance to an already powerful story. Congressional representatives were beginning to respond to the viral incident. Representative Angela Martinez, chair of the House Transportation Committee, issued a statement calling for hearings on airline discrimination practices. What we've witnessed today is unacceptable in 2024, her statement read. No parent should face harassment for the basic act of traveling with their child. We will be investigating whether this incident represents a pattern of discriminatory behavior that requires legislative intervention. The story was also sparking international attention. European aviation authorities were commenting on American airline practices. Canadian politicians were referencing it in parliamentary debates. What had started as one incident on one flight was becoming a global conversation about transportation equity and civil rights. But perhaps the most important response was happening in living rooms and coffee shops and playgrounds across the country where parents were talking to their children about fairness, dignity, and standing up for others. The viral explosion was just beginning. But already it was clear that this story would have consequences far beyond one flight, one airline, or even one industry. The conversation about who deserves dignity in public spaces, who gets questioned and who gets trusted, who stands up and who stays silent, was spreading to every corner of society. And it had all started with a crying baby, a discriminatory flight attendant, and one woman who decided that what she was witnessing was unacceptable. As Flight 447 was finally cleared for takeoff 3 hours behind schedule due to the incident and crew replacement, Darius found himself sitting in the quiet aftermath of the storm, Hope sleeping peacefully in his arms. The cabin had settled into an unusual atmosphere of shared experience and mutual respect. Passengers who had been strangers were now connected by having witnessed something significant together. Rachel had moved to the empty seat next to Darius after the airline staff offered to reconfigure seating to accommodate the passengers who had been involved in the incident. "How are you feeling now that the immediate crisis is over?" she asked, softly mindful of the sleeping baby. Exhausted, grateful, overwhelmed. Darius looked out the window as they climbed through the clouds. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't stood up. Someone else would have. No, they wouldn't have. You saw how long everyone stayed silent. You saw how some people actively supported the discrimination." Rachel was quiet for a moment, processing the weight of that truth. "I couldn't stay silent because I know what it feels like to be judged as an unfit parent. When I got divorced, people questioned everything I did with Lily. How I fed her, how I dressed her, whether I was too strict or too permissive. Being a single parent makes you a target for everyone's opinions. But you're white," Darius said gently. "You don't get questioned about whether she's actually your child. You don't get told you don't belong in public spaces. No, I don't. And that's exactly why I had to speak up. Because the privilege I have comes with the responsibility to use it when I see injustice." It was a remarkably mature and honest conversation about race and privilege happening at 30,000 feet, while social media exploded around them. Lily had fallen asleep across the aisle, her coloring book scattered around her, her latest drawing of people being nice to daddies with babies tucked under her arm. "She's amazing," Darius said, nodding toward Lily. "She gets it in a way that adults don't sometimes. Kids see people as people. Hope's going to grow up in a world where she faces assumptions because of her skin color. I want to make sure she also grows up knowing there are people like you and Lily who will stand up for what's right." Rachel felt something shift in her chest. This conversation was deeper and more meaningful than any first interaction she'd had with a man since her divorce. Here was someone who understood struggle, who had turned pain into purpose, who was raising a child with intention and love. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "After what we've been through, I think personal questions are fair game. What was your wife like?" Darius's expression softened. Alicia was. She was light. She laughed at everything, even things that weren't that funny. She could find joy in grocery shopping and folding laundry and changing diapers. She was going to be an amazing mother. She sounds wonderful. She was. And she would have loved watching you defend us today. She always said the world needed more people willing to stand up for strangers. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm sorry you're doing this alone. I'm sorry you are too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. both processing the strange intimacy of sharing grief with someone they'd just met. "What was your mother like?" Darius asked. "Fierce. Protective. She raised me to believe that kindness is a choice you make every day, especially when it's difficult." Rachel smiled sadly. She would have been mortified by how that flight attendant treated you. Mom didn't tolerate injustice from anyone. Sounds like Lily inherited the right traits. I hope so. As the flight progressed, they found themselves talking about everything and nothing. Single parenthood loss, hope for the future, the challenges of raising children in a complicated world. Other passengers occasionally approached to thank them or share their own stories. The incident had created an unusual openness among strangers, a shared recognition that they'd experienced something important together. Miguel Santos stopped by with his phone. "Mr. Thompson, my daughter Sophia wants to say something to you." The phone screen showed a teenage girl with bright eyes and a serious expression. "Mr. Thompson, I just wanted to say thank you for showing people that you can have power and still care about justice. And thank you for not backing down even when it would have been easier." "Thank you, Sophia. Keep asking questions and speaking up when you see things that aren't right. I will. And ma'am," she said, addressing Rachel, "thank you for being brave. I want to be like you when I'm a mom." The simple honesty of the teenager's comment moved both adults deeply. As they began their descent into Boston, Darius realized he wasn't ready for this experience to end. Not just the flight, but the connection he'd found with Rachel and Lily. "I know this is going to sound crazy," he said, "but I don't want to lose touch with you. It doesn't sound crazy at all. I mean, beyond just staying in touch. Hope and I are going to be in Boston for a week visiting her grandparents. Would you and Lily want to get coffee or lunch, or just spend time together?" Rachel felt a flutter of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. "I'd like that. Lily would too. She's already planning to teach Hope how to color." They exchanged contact information, but more than that, they exchanged a kind of promise that this connection forged in crisis and strengthened by shared values was worth exploring. "Fair warning," Darius said with a smile, "dating a CEO who just went viral for airline discrimination comes with some complications." "Fair warning," Rachel replied, "dating a single mom who stands up to authority figures comes with its own set of challenges. I think we can handle it." As the plane touched down in Boston, they weren't just two strangers who had met on a flight. They were two people who had found each other in a moment of crisis and discovered something worth holding on to. The viral story would continue to unfold. The industry changes would take time to implement. The legal and political implications would play out over months and years. But for Darius and Rachel, something simpler and more immediate was beginning. A connection based on shared values, mutual respect, and the recognition that they didn't have to face the challenges of single parenthood alone. Hope woke up as they were taxiing to the gate, looking around with bright, curious eyes. When she saw Rachel, she reached out her arms in the universal gesture of a baby who wants to be held. "I think someone remembers her protector," Darius said softly. Rachel took Hope, gently marveling again at how naturally the baby settled in her arms. Across the aisle, Lily was waking up too, rubbing her eyes and looking for her mother. "Mama, are we going to see Airplane Daddy and Baby Hope again?" "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to see them again very soon." As they prepared to disembark, all four of them together, it was clear that what had begun as a moment of crisis had become the foundation for something beautiful and lasting. The ripple effects of Flight 447 reached every corner of the aviation industry within 24 hours. What had started as one incident of discrimination was rapidly becoming the catalyst for the most comprehensive reform of airline passenger treatment policies in decades. At Skylink Technologies headquarters, Darius had called an emergency board meeting for 6 a.m. the morning after the flight. The crisis management team had worked through the night preparing a response that would leverage the company's massive influence to force industry-wide changes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Darius began addressing the assembled board members via video conference from his hotel room in Boston, Hope playing quietly on the floor beside him. "Yesterday's incident has shown us that our industry has a discrimination problem that can no longer be ignored. Board member Patricia Williams, a veteran of airline regulation battles, leaned forward. Darius, while what happened to you was unacceptable, we need to be careful not to make corporate decisions based on personal experiences. Patricia, this isn't personal anymore, it's business. Darius pulled up a presentation showing social media analytics stock price impacts and booking trend data. Our platform processed over 40 million reservation searches in the past 24 hours. Customer sentiment analysis shows a 15% decrease in confidence in airline treatment of minority passengers. That translates to real revenue loss. Carmen Rodriguez, joining the call from corporate headquarters, added supporting data. Sir, we've received over 12,000 customer service inquiries asking about our position on partner airline discrimination policies. Our silence would be interpreted as complicity. Chief Technology Officer Michael Chen had been analyzing the broader implications. Darius, if we implement the policy changes you're proposing, we're essentially forcing every major airline in North America to restructure their passenger treatment protocols. That's unprecedented corporate influence on social policy, which is exactly why we have to do it right, Darius replied. We're not just a technology company anymore. We're a platform that affects how millions of people experience air travel. That comes with responsibility. He outlined the comprehensive reform package Skylink would require from all partner airlines, mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff with annual recertification requirements, real-time complaint tracking protections that prevented incidents from being buried or ignored, clear passenger treatment standards with specific protections for traveling families, financial penalties for discrimination, incidents with proceeds funding diversity and inclusion programs, independent oversight committees including passenger advocates and civil rights experts. The scope was staggering. Airlines would have 90 days to implement the new standards or face suspension from the Skylink platform. Board member James Rodriguez raised the obvious concern. Darius, this could cost us partnerships worth billions of dollars if airlines refuse to comply. Then we'll find new partners who understand that treating customers with dignity is good business. The vote was unanimous. Skylink Technologies would use its platform dominance to force industry-wide reform regardless of the financial risk. Meanwhile, at Red Wing Airlines, CEO Richard Caldwell was facing a corporate nightmare. The stock price had dropped 22% overnight. Major corporate customers were canceling contracts. Employee morale was plummeting as staff faced public criticism for working for a discriminatory company. Sir Chief Operating Officer Linda Martinez reported, "We've had 17 crew members request transfers out of customer-facing roles since yesterday. They're afraid of being associated with discrimination incidents." The Human Resources Department was overwhelmed with calls from employees asking about new training requirements, policy changes, and whether their jobs were secure. "We need to get ahead of this," Caldwell declared. "I want a complete overhaul of our passenger treatment policies announced within 48 hours. I want every employee retrained within 30 days, and I want a diversity and inclusion officer hired by the end of the week." But the changes went beyond individual airlines. The Federal Aviation Administration was facing pressure from congressional representatives to investigate whether discrimination in air travel required federal intervention. Representative Angela Martinez had announced formal hearings on airline discrimination scheduled to begin within 2 weeks. The incident on Flight 447 has highlighted practices that may violate federal civil rights laws, her office stated. "We will be investigating whether legislative action is necessary to ensure equal treatment of all air travelers." Civil rights organizations were mobilizing as well. The NAACP National Urban League and other advocacy groups issued a joint statement calling for comprehensive reform of airline industry practices. "What we witnessed on Flight 447 was not an isolated incident," said NAACP President Derek Washington. "It was a rare moment when discrimination was captured on video and the victim had the power to respond immediately. But for every Darius Thompson who can fight back, there are thousands of parents who face similar treatment with no recourse." The story had also sparked international attention. European aviation authorities were reviewing their own anti-discrimination policies. The International Air Transport Association was calling an emergency meeting to address global passenger treatment standards. But the most significant changes were happening at the grassroots level. Parent advocacy groups were organizing fly-ins at major airports, monitoring passenger treatment and documenting incidents. Social media campaigns were teaching travelers their rights and encouraging them to report discrimination. The hashtag #DadsDeserveBetter had evolved into a broader movement using Fly with Dignity, encompassing all forms of passenger discrimination. Dr. Maya Patel from Georgetown Law was emerging as a leading voice in the reform movement. What's unprecedented about this situation is the speed of accountability, she explained in interviews. Usually, discrimination complaints get lost in bureaucratic processes that take months or years to resolve. But when consequences are immediate and public, it forces real change. Corporate trainers specializing in bias prevention were suddenly in high demand as airlines scrambled to implement new policies. Dr. Sarah Kim, who had developed cultural competency training for healthcare professionals, was adapting her programs for aviation industry use. The challenge isn't just teaching staff not to discriminate, she explained. It's helping them recognize their unconscious biases and developing practices that prevent those biases from affecting passenger treatment. Technology companies were also responding to the opportunity. Several startups announced new platforms for reporting and tracking discrimination incidents in real time. The goal was to create transparency that would make bias impossible to hide. But perhaps the most important impact was happening in families across the country, where parents were having conversations with their children about fairness, justice, and standing up for others. Rachel Morgan, back home in Boston, was fielding interview requests from major news outlets. She'd been reluctant to speak publicly, preferring to keep the focus on the broader issues rather than her personal story. But when a local news station asked to interview her and Lily together, she agreed, recognizing the power of her daughter's innocent perspective. Lily, the reporter, asked, "Why do you think it was important for your mom to help the man on the airplane? Because being mean to daddies with babies is not nice." Lily replied seriously, "And when someone is not nice, you should tell them to stop." The simple morality of a 4-year-old was being broadcast to millions of viewers, cutting through all the corporate complexity and political implications to the heart of the matter. Treat people with kindness. Educational institutions were incorporating the Flight 447 incident into curricula on civil rights, business ethics, and social responsibility. Harvard Business School announced a new case study on corporate leadership and social justice. Elementary schools were using age-appropriate versions of the story to teach children about fairness and standing up for others. The long-term implications were still unfolding, but one thing was clear. A moment of discrimination had become a catalyst for reform that would affect how millions of people experienced air travel for years to come. And it had all started with a crying baby, a biased flight attendant, and one woman's refusal to stay silent when she witnessed injustice. The industry would never be the same. 3 months after Flight 447, Darius Thompson stood in his office overlooking downtown Seattle, reading the latest quarterly report on airline discrimination incidents. The numbers told a remarkable story. Complaints were down 62% across all Skylink partner airlines. Customer satisfaction scores had reached historic highs, and the industry-wide policy reforms were being hailed as a model for corporate social responsibility. But the most meaningful change in his life had nothing to do with corporate metrics. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel Hope's First Steps video attached. She walked 3 whole steps before falling down. Lily was cheering so loud the neighbors came over. Darius smiled, watching the short video of his daughter wobbling forward with determination, while Lily clapped enthusiastically in the background. Hope was now 11 months old, and the changes in her life had been as dramatic as the changes in the airline industry. The relationship between Darius and Rachel had developed slowly and thoughtfully. Their first coffee date in Boston had turned into daily phone calls, weekend visits, and a growing recognition that they were building something special together. "Carmen," he called to his assistant, "move my 3 p.m. meeting. I want to leave early today. Another family dinner with the Morgans? Carmen asked with a knowing smile. She'd watched her boss transform over the past 3 months from a workaholic CEO barely managing single parenthood into a man who prioritized time with the woman and child who'd become central to his life. Actually, I'm picking out engagement rings, Darius said quietly. Carmen's face lit up. Sir, that's wonderful news. It was wonderful, but it was also complicated. Dating as a high-profile CEO who'd become a civil rights symbol required careful navigation. Every public appearance with Rachel and Lily was photographed and analyzed. Their relationship had become part of a larger narrative about love, transcending racial boundaries and families forming in unexpected ways. But in quiet moments, weekend mornings when all 4 of them made pancakes together, evenings when Hope and Lily played while he and Rachel talked about everything and nothing, the public attention faded away. They were just a family figuring out how to love each other. The professional success of the airline reform initiatives had exceeded everyone's expectations. Skylink's influence had forced rapid comprehensive changes across the industry. Every major airline now employed diversity and inclusion officers. Bias training was mandatory for all customer-facing staff. Real-time complaint tracking programs had made discrimination incidents impossible to hide. More importantly, the culture was shifting. Passenger treatment scores across all demographics were improving. Parents reported feeling more comfortable flying with children. The fear and anxiety that had characterized air travel for many minority passengers was beginning to ease. Congressional hearings had resulted in the Thompson-Morgan Act, federal legislation requiring anti-discrimination training and clear complaint procedures for all transportation providers. The bill named for Darius and Rachel established federal standards that would protect travelers regardless of which state they flew through. Mr. Thompson, Carmen announced you have a call from the White House. The president wants to discuss the upcoming signing ceremony for the transportation equity legislation. 6 months ago, Darius would have dropped everything for a presidential phone call. Today, he looked at his watch and calculated how long the call would take versus when he needed to leave to meet Rachel for ring shopping. Tell them I'll call back tomorrow morning. Family comes first today. It was a statement that would have been unthinkable in his pre-Hope, pre-Rachel life. But becoming a father and falling in love had reordered his priorities in ways that made him both a better leader and a happier person. At Rachel's apartment in Boston, she was having a similar conversation with her supervisor at Boston Children's Hospital. Rachel, the National Pediatric Nurses Association wants you to keynote their conference on advocacy and patient rights, Director Susan Chen explained. Your response to the airline incident has made you a symbol of professional courage. I appreciate the recognition, but I'm not sure I want to be a professional speaker about discrimination. I just want to be a good nurse and a good mom. You can be both. And you can show other healthcare workers how to stand up when they see injustice. Rachel considered the offer while watching Lily and Hope play together in the living room. The 2 girls had become inseparable, with Lily taking on a protective big sister role that was both sweet and fierce. Mama Lily called out, Hope wants to know if Darius is going to be her new daddy. The question was delivered with 4-year-old directness that made complicated adult situations suddenly simple. Hope couldn't actually ask that question yet, but Lily's interpretation of baby babbling often revealed truths that adults danced around. Would you like that? Rachel asked carefully. Yes. Then we could all live in the same house and be a real family, out of the mouths of babes again. The innocent wisdom of children cutting through adult hesitations and fears. Rachel's phone rang. It was Darius. I know we planned to meet at the jewelry store, he said, but would you mind if I came to your apartment instead? I have something I want to ask you, and I think Lily should be part of it. Of course. We'll be here. An hour later, Darius arrived with Hope, who immediately toddled toward Lily with squeals of delight. But he was also carrying a small velvet box that made Rachel's heart race. Girls, he said. Settling onto the living room floor where both children could see him. I want to ask your mom something very important, and I want to make sure you're okay with it. Lily climbed onto his lap with the confidence of a child who'd been claimed as family. Are you going to ask Mama to marry you? How did you know that? Because you look nervous, and Mama looks happy, and Hope keeps clapping. Darius looked at Rachel, who was indeed happy and slightly teary-eyed. Lily's observation skills are remarkable. She gets that from her grandmother. Rachel Morgan Darius said formally, still sitting on the floor with both girls, "Will you marry me? Will you let me be Lily's stepdad and help raise her to be as brave and kind as her mother? Will you help me raise Hope to be strong and compassionate? Will you build a family with us?" The proposal was unconventional, delivered on a living room floor to an audience of toddlers, but it was perfect for them. "Yes," Rachel said simply to all of it. Lily cheered, Hope clapped, and Darius slipped a ring onto Rachel's finger while both little girls tried to climb into the hug that followed. "When can we live in the same house?" Lily asked practically. "Soon, sweetheart. Very soon." As they sat together on the floor, surrounded by children's toys and the evidence of daily life, both adults marveled at how far they'd traveled from that difficult flight 3 months ago. They'd found love in crisis. They'd built trust through shared values. They'd discovered that the best families sometimes form in the most unexpected ways. The viral video that had changed an industry had also changed their lives, bringing together 4 people who needed each other more than they'd realized. Outside, the world continued to debate airline policies and discrimination reform. Inside, a new family was beginning, built on the foundation of 2 parents who'd chosen to stand up for what was right and found each other in the process. 6 months later, on a crisp Saturday morning in October, Rachel Morgan and Darius Thompson were married in a ceremony that perfectly captured the spirit of how they'd met, unconventional, meaningful, and witnessed by a community that had formed around shared values. The wedding took place at Boston's Airport Marriott, in the same hotel where many passengers from Flight 447 had stayed after their delayed arrival. It was an intentional choice, transforming a space associated with travel disruption into one celebrating love and new beginnings. Miguel Santos had flown in from Chicago with his family. Jennifer Torres had come from Los Angeles, bringing her camera to document the happy ending to the story that had made her famous. Captain Robert Anderson, who had been quietly instrumental in implementing Red Wing's new passenger treatment policy, served as an unofficial usher. Even some of the passengers who had initially supported the discrimination had asked to attend, seeking redemption through witnessing the love that had grown from the crisis they'd helped create. Hope, now walking steadily at 14 months, wore a tiny white dress and carried a basket of flower petals that she scattered with delighted abandon. Lily, in a pale blue dress that matched her mother's bouquet, took her role as ring-bearer with utmost seriousness. The ceremony itself was conducted by Dr. Ruth Ellen Foster, Memorial Baptist Church pastor David Williams, who had known Rachel's family for decades. He began with words that acknowledged both the joy of the moment and the pain that had led them here. "We gather today to celebrate not just the union of Rachel and Darius, but the beautiful truth that love can grow from the most unexpected circumstances. That standing up for justice can lead to standing up for each other. That what begins in crisis can become the foundation for joy." Rachel had chosen to walk down the aisle, not alone, but hand in hand with Lily. When they reached the altar, where Darius waited, with Hope in his arms, the 4 of them formed a circle that symbolized their commitment, not just to each other, but to the family they were creating together. The vows they exchanged were personal and specific, referencing the journey that had brought them together. Rachel said, her voice steady, despite her tears, "You showed me that courage comes in many forms. The courage to love after loss. The courage to fight injustice even when it costs you privacy and peace. The courage to trust a stranger with your most precious thing." She looked down at Hope, who was reaching for her with tiny, trusting hands. "I promise to love your daughter as my own. I promise to stand with you when the world is watching and when we're alone. I promise to teach our children that kindness is always the right choice, even when it's the difficult one." Darius's vows were equally personal. "Rachel, you stepped into my life during the worst moment of what should have been a simple trip. You defended me and Hope when no one else would. You showed me that being a good parent means teaching your children to see injustice and choose to fight it. He looked at Lily, who was beaming up at them both. I promise to love your daughter as my own. I promise to be worthy of the trust you showed a stranger on an airplane. I promise to use whatever power I have to make the world better for our children. Pastor Williams invited them to exchange rings, but first there was one more element to the ceremony. Carmen Rodriguez stepped forward carrying 2 additional small rings sized for children's fingers. Lily and Hope Pastor Williams said, "You are part of this family too. These rings are promises that you will always have parents who love you, protect you, and teach you to love and protect others." Lily held out her hand solemnly as Darius slipped the small ring onto her finger. Hope was more interested in trying to eat her ring, which made everyone laugh, and reminded them all that family includes chaos, imperfection, and unconditional love regardless of behavior. By the power vested in me by the state of Massachusetts, and in the presence of this community that has formed around your love, I now pronounce you married. You may kiss each other. The kiss was sweet, joyful, and interrupted by 2 small children who wanted to be part of the hug that followed. The reception featured speeches from unexpected guests. Miguel Santos spoke about witnessing courage under pressure. Jennifer Torres talked about the power of social media to create accountability and connection. Even Captain Anderson offered brief remarks about how the aviation industry had been changed by the example of 2 people choosing love over anger. But the most moving speech came from an unexpected source, Jennifer Walsh, the former Red Wing flight attendant, who had lost her job over the discrimination incident. "I know I have no right to be here," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "What I did 6 months ago was wrong, and I've spent every day since then trying to understand how I let bias and prejudice cloud my judgment." The room was silent, everyone waiting to see where this would go. "I've been working with civil rights organizations, going through intensive bias training, trying to become a better person. Not because I'm hoping to get my job back, I know that's not happening, but because I needed to understand how someone who thought she was professional and fair could treat another human being so badly." She looked directly at Darius and Rachel. "I can't undo what I did. But watching how you both responded with dignity, with purpose, with love, taught me more about character than anything else in my life. You could have destroyed me. Instead, you used my failure as an opportunity to create change that helps everyone." Jennifer Walsh paused, gathering courage for what came next. "I'm now working with airline training programs sharing my story so other employees can recognize bias before they act on it. It's not enough, but it's a start." The speech was a powerful reminder that redemption was possible, that people could grow and change, and that sometimes the most unlikely people could become advocates for justice. As the evening wound down, the new family of 4 found themselves alone on the hotel's outdoor terrace, Boston's skyline twinkling in the distance. "Was this what you imagined when we met on that plane?" Rachel asked, leaning into Darius's side while the girls played quietly nearby. "I didn't dare imagine anything this good," he replied. "I was just trying to survive each day with hope. I never thought I'd find someone who would love us both so completely. I never thought I'd find someone who understood that being a good parent means teaching children to fight for what's right." Lily ran over and climbed into Rachel's lap. "Mama, are we really going to all live together now?" "Yes, sweetheart, we're really going to be a family." "Good," Lily said matter-of-factly. "Hope needs a big sister and Darius needs help taking care of her." Hope, hearing her name, toddled over and raised her arms to be picked up by Darius. As he lifted her, she looked around at her new family with the perfect contentment that only babies can achieve. The viral video that had started it all was still being shown in diversity training seminars and college classrooms. The policy changes they'd sparked were protecting travelers every day. The love they'd found was creating a family that would carry those values forward. But in that moment, on a hotel terrace overlooking the city where they'd first met, they weren't symbols or activists or change agents. They were just 4 people who belonged together, who had found each other through crisis and chosen each other through love. The unthinkable had happened. A moment of discrimination had become a catalyst for justice reform and the kind of love that changes everything it touches. 2 years after Flight 447, the Thompson-Morgan family lived in a house with a green door and a backyard to swing set, just as Lily had once predicted in her childhood drawings. Hope, now 2.5, was an energetic toddler who spoke in full sentences and had her father's determination combined with her stepmother's compassion. Lily, at 6, had become the kind of confident, socially aware child who stood up for classmates and asked thoughtful questions about fairness and justice. The industry reforms sparked by their story had become standard practice across transportation. The Thompson-Morgan Act had been signed into federal law 18 months earlier in a White House ceremony, where Hope had charmed the president by trying to share her juice box with the assembled dignitaries. But perhaps the most meaningful legacy was playing out in smaller, quieter ways every day. At airports across the country, gate agents now received mandatory training that included watching the Flight 447 video and discussing how unconscious bias affected their interactions with passengers. Flight attendants learned de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity. Security personnel were taught to recognize the difference between actual threats and their own prejudices. Dr. Maya Patel had established the Center for Transportation Equity at Georgetown Law, funded by substantial donation from Skylink Technologies. The center monitored discrimination incidents, advocated for passenger rights, and provided legal support for travelers who faced unfair treatment. Jennifer Torres had parlayed her viral live stream into a career as a social justice documentarian. Her film about the aftermath of Flight 447, titled The Unthinkable: How One Flight Changed Everything, had won awards at multiple film festivals and was being used in schools to teach children about standing up for others. Miguel Santos had started a nonprofit organization called Travelers' Dignity that provided support and advocacy for passengers who experienced discrimination. His daughter, Sophia, now a freshman at Harvard, studying business and social justice, often spoke at conferences about the importance of individual courage in creating societal change. Even Jennifer Walsh had found redemption in purpose. Her work with airline training programs had helped prevent countless incidents of bias and discrimination. She'd written a book called Recognizing My Bias: A Flight Attendant's Journey to Understanding that had become required reading in diversity and inclusion programs across multiple industries. On a sunny Saturday morning in their Boston suburban home, Darius was pushing Hope on the swing while Rachel and Lily worked in the garden they'd planted together. It was the kind of ordinary family moment that felt miraculous to adults who had found each other through extraordinary circumstances. Daddy Hope said, using the word she'd learned to apply to Darius with absolute certainty. Why do people sometimes not like other people? It was a question that would have broken his heart 2 years ago. Today, he was grateful for the opportunity to shape how his daughter understood the world. Sometimes people are afraid of what they don't understand, he said carefully, slowing the swing so they could have a real conversation, and sometimes they've been taught wrong things about people who look different from them. That's silly, Hope declared, with toddler certainty. It is silly, and it's also harmful. That's why we work to help people learn better ways to think about each other. Lily looked up from the flowers she was planting with Rachel. Hope, tell Daddy about what happened at school yesterday. Hope's face lit up. There was a new boy, and some kids were being mean because he talks different. So I told them to stop, and then we all played together. And what did you learn? Darius prompted, knowing there was more to the story. That talking different doesn't mean anything bad. It just means different. And different can be good. The simplicity of childhood wisdom never failed to amaze him. Hope was growing up in a world where standing up for others was as natural as sharing toys or saying please and thank you. Rachel joined them on the porch, settling into the swing beside Hope's. Carmen called, she said to Darius. The aviation industry conference wants you to keynote again this year. Are you thinking about accepting? I'm thinking about suggesting they invite someone else. Maybe it's time to let other voices lead this conversation. It was a typical Darius response. He'd never sought the spotlight that came with being a civil rights symbol. He'd used his platform to create change, but he was always looking for ways to pass the microphone to others who deserved to be heard. There's a young black father in Atlanta who filed a discrimination complaint last month, Rachel continued. The airline resolved it quickly and fairly, following all the new protocols. He might have an interesting perspective on how the changes are working in practice. I like that idea. Their commitment to lifting up other voices had become a hallmark of their advocacy work. They'd discovered that their privilege came with the responsibility to amplify stories from people who didn't have access to corporate boardrooms or media interviews. Lily came running over with dirt on her hands and joy on her face. "Mama, the sunflowers we planted are growing, come see." As they all walked over to examine the tiny green shoots emerging from the soil, Hope reached for both her parents' hands, creating a chain that included everyone. "We're growing too," she announced, clearly pleased with her own observation. "We are indeed," Rachel said, squeezing her tiny hand. The Thompson-Morgan family had become a symbol of possibility that love could grow from crisis, that standing up for justice could create lasting change, that families could form in unexpected ways and flourish through commitment and care. But they were also just a family trying to raise good children, maintain meaningful work, and love each other through the ordinary challenges of daily life. That evening, as they settled into their bedtime routine, stories read in alternating voices, teeth brushed with varying degrees of cooperation, kisses distributed with careful equality, Darius reflected on how much had changed since that difficult flight. He'd started that journey as a man trying to prove he could be a good father while hiding his true identity. He'd ended up revealing both his corporate power and his personal vulnerabilities, using both to create positive change. Rachel had stepped onto that plane as a single mother grieving her own mother's death, uncertain about her future. She'd found love, purpose, and a partner who understood that courage was a daily choice. Hope and Lily had gained sibling stability and parents who would teach them that their voices mattered, their actions had consequences, and their choices could make the world better. The unthinkable had become the foundation for everything beautiful that followed. As Darius turned off the lights in the girls' room and listened to their peaceful breathing, he thought about the father who would board a flight somewhere tomorrow with his crying baby. About the gate agent who would choose patience over prejudice because she'd been trained to recognize bias. About the passenger who would speak up if she witnessed discrimination because she'd learned that silence was complicity. The ripples of that single moment of crisis and courage continued to spread, creating a world where Hope and Lily would grow up, expecting dignity, demanding justice, and knowing that love could triumph over hatred when people chose to stand up for what was right. Sometimes the unthinkable wasn't something terrible. Sometimes the unthinkable was simply love arriving when you least expected it in the form you least expected from the person you would never have thought to look for. And sometimes all it took was a baby who wouldn't stop crying, a single mother who did the unthinkable, and two people who chose to turn a moment of injustice into a lifetime of love. This story touches the hearts of millions because it reminds us that courage can come from the most unexpected places, and that standing up for what's right can change not just individual lives but entire industries. The love story that grew from this moment of crisis shows us that when we defend others, we often find the very thing we didn't know we were looking for. If this story inspired you to believe in the power of standing up for justice and the possibility of love growing from unlikely circumstances, or in the importance of treating every person with dignity regardless of their circumstances, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that celebrate the triumph of human kindness over prejudice, love over hate, and courage over silence. Because in a world that sometimes feels divided, we need more reminders that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose compassion over indifference. What would you have done in Rachel's situation? Would you have had the courage to stand up when you saw injustice happening right in front of you? Let us know in the comments below, and remember, every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change someone's world. Thank you for watching, and remember, the next time you see someone who needs defending, you might just be one choice away from changing everything.
Будем откачивать потоп.
Сейчас заберем Оева.
Юрчик прилетел вроде бы сегодня. Вроде бы да.
Сейчас заберем Амирхана, заберем Анара и поедем что-нибудь сделать.
Ну,
Во-первых, перекусить надо, потому что мы никто не кушал.
да, 100%. Да, у тебя слишком жесткий сараунд, понял? Слишком. Слишком.
Твоего района.
Низкие частоты, сзади хуя народа. Кому-то похуй ровно, а я коплю на ход. Хочу
Во, так интересно.
Тобой чё?
Магнит, пустая дорога.
Сим-карта, мегафон. Я невысокий, ростом где-то 1,8. Не курю, сиги тоже бросил. Но пока вывозит, их не загружаю. Тору не полю.
Камеры. А вот чоп-чоп.
Кто-то шпилит. По району раскатали пилик. На полу наш тайс, закатанные стекла.
Тормоза.
Не вникаю,
Хорошие.
разбавляю соком, как Попов. 4К
Четко я.
занимаюсь спортом, если
Так,
кто-то
вот тут может
спросит.
лагать, но мы сейчас суету сделаем.
Да, сейчас чуть-чуть будет. Бля, вы бы знали, какая у нас палка огромная. Потоп.
До сих пор не знаю,
В Краснодаре потоп.
пару походу на
Смотрите.
озерах разъебали наш Макларен. Фоткай только нормально, уткну на Али.
Я завтра домой поеду.
О,
А меня вещи надо собирать.
На панели
на чем?
Ты двигаюсь до пациков на полу тазы.
Пошел.
Сзади
Что
басы,
первый
на
делаем?
репите стоит. Если
Не,
чё,
и эта
смотри,
полоса стоит.
дыма-то хуя
Невозможно.
на панели.
А будем стрим?
Не поверю.
Спеша по району,
Литвин.
до пациков.
Бля, нога как болит, пацаны. Может, у меня перелом, мне может пойти снимок сделать?
Не. Ты понервничал, наверное, просто.
Лодка спорт.
Лодка О, реально.
Немато показывает.
Блядь, можно показать. Точно.
Посмотрим. Бля, нога болит, сука, блядь. Отец видел? Нет, отец не видел. Можем показать? Можем.
Я уверен, понравится. Если ему Гранта нравится, то это ему точно понравится.
Какая гранта ему нравится? Кто тебе сказал такое?
Ну, он сказал, лучше, чем Порш.
Вась, это что?
Ох, потоп
Бля.
просто. Вот смотрите, вообще вот.
Ой, бля.
Максимальный потоп. Очень много воды. Очень много воды.
Супер, не делаем здесь цель?
Нет, чека нету, все. Чек
Короче,
все.
человек появляется, знаете как? Вот по трассе едешь, понял?
Офигеть.
Слышь, пацаны, блядь, да ну ты что встал? Вась, он нахуй встал.
Вот ты видел, как Рилс в инсте полетела? Как я с тобой говорю, это я с Дяханом, это мне сзади так чипала. Говорю, сигарету будешь? Я говорю, да.
Нога болит.
Понервничал ты? А мази нету?
У меня интернет перестал работать. У вас работает?
Да, Юрчик идет. Да, Юрчику надо набрать срочно. Он прилетел, да, сегодня?
Черный без хозяин.
Юрчик сегодня прилетел вроде
Я
бы.
не ебу, брат.
Не-не, пусть он
Чего
спрашивает.
спамишь мне в голову?
Откат. Ох, так, милицию не надо делать.
Не надо это. Осуждаю.
Ой, хорошо. Серая, Веста на штампах.
На каких штампах, идиот? Ай, нога болит, ноет на погоду.
Родился в 20-м роддоме 20-й больницы. Как говорится, я обязан этим гордиться. И так есть на самом деле, я не базарю.
прилетел, прикинь, походу. Они на самолете на 4 суперавто сам приехал с Москвы. Походу, да. Оп! Чух-чух-чух-чух-чух-чух-чух-чух.
Маша располагает. Вася, есть зеленый?
Хорошо, 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 все хорошо, все хорошо.
Все хорошо, нормально, дорога шеф, нормально, все нормально.
Литвин.
Вася, ты нахуй бухал,
Да
царь?
нет, это не пивя. Это не пивя, это просто на улице Рейн.
Какой Рейн?
Это Рейн, братан.
Конченая мразь.
Да это не пивя, я мало вчера выпил.
Конченая, я сейчас его расскажу тебе.
За что?
Алкаш, конченый.
Не надо.
Машина потеря, так тренировка у меня. Ничего не видно.
Заводская, ё-моё. Не видно.
Алкаш.
Да я просто пивя вчера чуть на ночь выпил и все.
Бля.
Одну бутылочку 0,5.
Зарядок нет, ничего нету вообще.
Есть, уже, брат, уже целых 20%. Нет, там, то, конечно, там уже бери, забирай, подключается и все, и уже больше, дальше лучше
Все,
будет.
за Анаром, вот мы уже
У нас
подъехали.
палка самая бомба, ты че еще Сонар охуеет от нее? Клянусь, у нас палка, как вот этот монитор по высоте, вот такая вот. Подожди, больше, выше, ключ вот. Прикиньте, вот палка высоты отсюда вот до сюда
Вася,
где-то.
почему ты так много спамишь? Ну, ты не казал, что ты когда много спамишь, что мне ухо вот,
Зазвенело?
у вас нет такого в чате? Вот он, когда мало разговаривает, он нормальный. Он говорит, вот так хуярит, как голова взрывается, Вася, я не могу, блядь. Есть, Вася?
Да не врите.
Отвечаю.
Неправда.
Еще монотонно так говорит, вот так, понял? И трахает уши.
Ультразвук. Да в
Блядь, не
смысле?
работает, сука.
Как? Реально не
Блядь,
работает.
сука, поворот
Прикиньте,
хотел
ручник не
залететь.
работает. Офигеть. Ручник не работает. А как такое возможно? О! Чё? Блядь, ручник не работает. На, дружище, на зарядку снимаем.
На мою палку, Вася.
Каким
Хоть она тяжелая.
Да, она очень ровная.
Блядь, дождь идет, а я забыл обуться, Вася. Как холодно, блядь. Сегодня нас на улице как стримить. Сука. А мой прикид, коллега,
Жилетка. Крок.
ничего нет, одежды не осталось.
Футболка. Оп. Оп. Пойдет. Ого. Ничего себе.
Где были?
Кресло бомбу. Там потоп, короче.
Знаю, блядь. Здорово. Меня в детское кресло, блядь, посадили.
Нам, как ты?
Здорово, Матван. Нормально, пойдем пожрем.
Пойдем, блядь, на улице что происходит вообще?
Сломал.
А что ты без ног прошел? Что с тобой? А что случилось? Ты что, пресс качал? Что? А что мне делать?
Майк Вазов. Мне просто в Инстаграме второй раз мне уже Майк Вазовский пишет.
Какой Майк Вазовский?
Просто какой-то этот. Какой-то типа, ну, Майк Вазовский пишет.
О, белый гелик, как смотрится.
Это мой.
Какой твой?
Поет прекрасно.
Что ты мне тут рассказываешь? Здорово, молодежь, как она? Что, тебя подъебала Алиса? Да. Алиса?
Я сам написал.
Какая Алиса?
За воротом.
А, да, прикинь, не работает. Это кто придумал такое?
Как ты думаешь?
А что? На их? Это кто сделал?
Я?
Ебать, интересно. Нахуй?
Алло, Спарша, по-моему, да?
Это с Порша, да, с Каена.
Я говорю, у него телефон сломался, как у меня. Кто знает, да.
В смысле сломался?
Нужно поехать починить его, походу.
Короче, у меня 2 недели назад
Загружает.
сел в ноль вообще, сел телефон.
Сколько
17-й?
Да, 17 Pro Max. Не знаю, роляет ли это Pro Max, Pro просто. У меня Pro Max, у него Pro Max. У меня в ноль сел,
Ну,
не включался зарядка, я его отдал в ремонт. И у него сейчас в ноль разрядился, он поставил, он даже не видит зарядки, видишь?
да, в натуре.
Вообще не видит ничего.
Вы купили какие-то
Кто шарит, да,
китайские
это чего?
телефоны. Где ты
У
купил?
меня тоже так было.
Я
его в
тебе
ремонт
сейчас как
отдал.
по башке дам.
Ну, где купил?
Это как называется?
А.
Таиланде. Апстор или что?
В рехаб-центре.
А что ты Лера гелик сюда привез?
А чё?